Good morning. My name is Luís Tirapicos. I'm a historian of science at the University of Lisbon and one of the organizers of this conference. I'm affiliated with the CIUC, the Inter-University Center for the History of Science and Technology, which is the largest Portuguese research center in the field, and at this moment the host of two IRC research projects in the Faculty of Sciences of the University of Lisbon. I'm also a member of APIA, a Portuguese Association of Archaeology, which have over the years acted in mainly three areas: salvage archaeology, rock art studies, and archaeoastronomy. The organizers of Protolang 6 are obviously grateful to these institutions for their collaboration and support. It is my privilege and honor to present our next keynote speaker. The distinguished scholar, Professor Roslyn Frank, is Professor Emeritus in Spanish and Portuguese linguistics at the University of Iowa in the US. She has been for many years the treasurer of the European Society for the Astronomy and Culture, with a leading role as one of the promoters and organizers of the cultural astronomy community. Her research areas include cultural, cognitive and historical linguistics, as well as ethnography, with a special emphasis on the Basque language and culture. She has published extensively in ethnomathematics and ethnoastronomy. Over the past 20 years, her publications have brought together ethnographic and linguistic evidence, pointing to the existence of an archaic European belief, namely that humans descend from bears, a belief retained by the Basques into the 20th century and reflected in a panoply of similar European folk beliefs, ritual, performances, and practices. In this talk, Professor Roslyn will address a new approach to assessing the value of Basque as a tool for interpreting European prehistory. Please welcome Professor Roslyn. Thank you.
For centuries, Basque, Euskara, has been viewed as a linguistic isolate. It is often referred to as the mystery language of Europe, classed as pre-Indo-European, and hence recognized as antedating Indo-European languages. At the same time, it's only logical that the assertion concerning its status as an isolate has contributed to its marginalization by historical linguists who have been concerned with exploring the origins of features shared by Indo-European languages and larger questions associated with the traditional research paradigm utilized in the field of Indo-European comparative linguistics. However, the key to the mystery might be hiding in plain sight and has been overlooked because the answer requires rethinking aspects of the traditional Indo-European research paradigm, as well as making adjustments to the narrative associated with it, a narrative that has been used quite consistently over the past 150 years to frame the linguistic prehistory of Europe and Europeans. Before beginning our discussion, a few comments are in order that will help to avoid confusion concerning the scope and goals of the current project. Concretely, the way that the problem has been conceptualized in this study will be clearly laid out within the limits of the time that we have, emphasizing the preliminary nature of the research presented and the limitations inherent in the approach utilized. Additionally, I'm fully aware that there are still unanswered questions concerning the significance of the comparisons that will be discussed and the conclusions drawn from them, all of which should be considered tentative and subject to future revision. Finally, there is the impact that the results potentially might have in terms of calling for a revision of the traditional Indo-European narrative. Before proceeding, an aspect of the Indo-European paradigm needs to be highlighted, as well as how it differs from the present approach. As is well known, the term Proto Indo-European, in its strict linguistic sense, refers collectively to a set of phonological, lexical, and morphosyntactic features, similarities that have been attested across Indo-European daughter languages. In a broader sense, the expression Proto-Indo-European is understood to constitute a set of elements once found in a unitary language spoken at some time in the past. The latter interpretation of the term differs from the first in a significant way. The term Proto-Indo-European is no longer viewed as merely a collection of reconstructed features, that is, simply as a construct. Instead, the shared features are postulated to be the incomplete remains of what was once a real living language spoken by a cohesive group of speakers. Now, for three foundational assumptions. Starting over 200 years ago, we begin to come across the first of three key assumptions that would be built into the canonical Indo-European narrative, that similarities attested in Indo-European languages not only indicated the genealogical relatedness of the languages in question, but also that the similarities themselves represented an Ursprache spoken in the past. Once viewed as a unitary Ursprache, the Ur-language needed speakers, its Urvolk, who would be called Proto-Indo-Europeans, often also referred to in the literature simply as Indo-Europeans. And the third assumption soon followed, that the Urvolk required a homeland, their Urheimat. Furthermore, by implication, repeatedly referring to the Urvolk as Indo-Europeans conferred upon them a common identity, and by extension, posited a community that self-identifies with the term. In the process, the term has projected a kind of transnational, or perhaps supranatural national or European identity. What is not contemplated is the possibility that the feature lineages encompassed by the term Proto-Indo-European might be stratified, layered chronologically, with some lineages being far older than others, and thus having their own prehistory. This possibility constitutes the core of the current project. Its feasibility will be tested by examining a feature lineage found in Euskara and comparing it to what appears to be a highly similar feature lineage in Indo-European languages. This approach will afford us a different vantage point from which to examine a key controlling aspect of the Indo-European narrative, namely that the family tree model employed is closed at the top. Conceptually speaking, the Indo-European narrative requires all Proto-Indo-European features to occupy the highest node. This means they are all assigned to the same temporal horizon, either as originating in the putative, unitary proto-language itself, a dialect continuum, or as having developed subsequently in the daughter languages. In contrast, the narrative developed in this study begins with a different hypothesis, the assumption that there are at least two types of feature lineages that can be identified. Oops, did something here. Okay. There is the oldest recoverable set consisting of primary feature lineages, such as the one under examination in this study, while there are others designated as secondary feature lineages. The determining characteristic of a primary feature lineage is that it must be attested both in Basque and in Indo-European languages, but with no evidence for borrowing in either direction. That a primary feature lineage is identifiable in both systems suggests that it can be viewed as a shared retention that ultimately evolved out of a common ancestral lineage. On the other hand, there are many characteristics in Indo-European languages, features also classed as Proto-Indo-European, that have no counterparts whatsoever in Basque. Consequently, these would fall into the category of secondary feature lineages. Naturally, the division is a tentative one that needs to be fleshed out by concrete studies of additional feature lineages, a project that is already underway. Hence, the primary feature lineage under analysis in this talk should be viewed as an example of the type of analyses that are currently being carried out in order to construct a more complex and comprehensive picture of the evolutionary pathways taken by such primary feature lineages in times past. Returning to the Indo-European narrative, even if we were to allow for the reification of Proto-Indo-European reconstructions, we could conclude that the resulting entity called Proto-Indo-European did not fall from heaven. In other words, the proto-features themselves must have their own prehistory, for as is well known, natural language systems do not come into existence simply because they were invented one day out of whole cloth by their speakers. But the question of the ultimate origins of these proto-features has not been broached for a very obvious reason. Until now, there's been no comparative data available. No data sets have been identified that would constitute the essential comparanda for such explorations of the deep prehistory of the features in question. Oops, now what did I do? That was quick. That's what happens. Here we go. Oh, wow. Well, you get to see it in reverse. Keep going back. Here we go. Now this computer has a different keyboard. Okay. All right, as I said, I'm trying to keep my finger on the right one rather than the one that says end. My computer doesn't have end on it. Okay, here we go. Okay. By analyzing a discrete feature lineage attested across all branches of Indo-European and comparing it to what is a highly similar feature lineage found in Basque, allows us to test the validity of the assumption that all Proto-Indo-European features should be pegged to the same chronological horizon. That is, that we're going to question that. A horizon that the Indo-European narrative sets at 4000 BCE. More concretely, the hypothesis that will be tested is whether the characteristics of the Basque feature lineage, when compared to those associated with the Proto-Indo-European feature lineage, provide a means of assessing, first, whether the two feature lineages are related, and if so, how they might have come to be related. Finally, there is the question of whether the results allow us to determine how the Indo-European model should be adjusted so that it can accommodate this apparent anomaly. The lineage chosen for this presentation is one that is defined by Indo-European historical linguistics as preserving an ancient phylogenetic signal within Indo-European languages. As will be demonstrated, comparing the lineage as it appears in Indo-European languages with the lineage in Basque increases the time depth that can be assigned, albeit tentatively, to both data sets. The comparison will allow us to discern phylogenetic signals that take us back to a much earlier stages than are currently accessible using the Indo-European tree model. These signals derive from a unit of analysis that is portrayed as a primary feature lineage, as I stated. We are not comparing languages. This is important to keep in mind, but rather feature lineages. Consequently, since the unit of analysis used in the comparisons is a feature lineage, it is discrete and readily identifiable. Again, given the limited scope of the investigation and the way that it is oriented, the data and conclusions, albeit tentative, are not intended to prove a genealogical relationship between languages. That is, between the Basque language and the languages of the Indo-European group. Instead, the goal is to demonstrate that by limiting the unit of analysis under study to a single discrete feature, and hence to an in-depth analysis of the phylogenetic lineage itself, a different vantage point is gained, from which, when combined with analyses of additional feature lineages, could shed new light on the linguistic prehistory of Europe. When comparing two features, the rule of thumb is that the more structurally complex feature should be ranked higher within the feature lineage being reconstructed than a monomorphemic variant or a variant that has an obscure etymology. There is a well-known example of a word in English which can be used to show how to determine whether a word is native or borrowed. The meaning of the English word vinegar is well known, and the word is viewed by speakers of English as monomorphemic. For speakers of French, however, its monomorphemic character disappears, replaced by a more structurally complex compound, vinagre, sour wine. The Old French vinagre passed into Middle English through Norman French as vinaigre, and in the process came to be viewed as monomorphemic by speakers of English. Okay, we're now going to test the primary feature lineage approach. Abundant evidence relating to the primary feature lineage under investigation is encountered both in Indo-European languages and in Basque, which allows us to test the rule of thumb concerning morphemic complexity. On the one side, there is a universal consensus that the Proto-Indo-European suffix "ko," the morpheme in question, along with its allomorph in "sko," should be classified as belonging to the Proto-Indo-European level of the Stammbaum model used to display Indo-European data sets. Because of its attestation across all branches of Indo-European, this Proto-Indo-European feature lineage currently occupies the uppermost node of the tree model, which in turn charts unilinear vertical descent. First, we will look at the meanings and functions of the Proto-Indo-European affix "ko." As reconstructed by Brugman, Proto-Indo-European "ko" has the meaning related to or belonging to what is denoted by the stem, where the actual nature of the relationship or connection may vary. Proto-Indo-European "ko" has a variant in "iko" with a similar meaning. Both Proto-Indo-European "ko" and "iko" are employed in Indo-European languages to form adjectives, as well as diminutives, functions that the Basque "ko" and its variant "eko" also have. As noted, Proto-Indo-European "ko" has a common phonological variant, an allomorph in "sko." No explanation is given for the presence of the initial sibilant. On the other hand, we have the data set constituted by the suffix "co" found in Basque. It is used derivationally as well as a pseudo-case marker and carries the meaning of related to or belonging to. When "co" is attached to a nominal or adjectival stem, the result is a compound term that can function to modify the following element. Here are some examples. Echeko Andrea, the woman of the house, from Eche, house, and Andrea, the woman. Gaurko Berria, today's news, from Gaur, today, and Berria, the news. Bilboko Egunkaria, a newspaper from Bilbao, Bilbao, and Egunkaria, newspaper. The Proto-Indo-European morpheme "co", along with its variant "iko", is amply attested in Romance languages. Speaking globally, in Romance, the phonological development of the Proto-Indo-European morpheme gave rise to forms in "iko", "eko", "ego", as well as "niego". According to the Diccionario de la Real Academia Española, these suffixes regularly indicate relationship, belonging to, pertaining to, or origin. Examples in Spanish are andariego, meaning restless, roving, from andar, to walk; mujeriego, a womanizer, from mujer, woman; pasiego, someone from the area around the Valle de Paz of the region of Cantabria; veraniego, related to summer, from verano, summer; manchego, a person from La Mancha, a region of Spain. As has been noted, the Proto-Indo-European morpheme "co" has a common phonological variant in "sco". In Basque, the affix "co" is regularly found in combination with the instrumental case marker "s", spelled as z, pronounced as an unvoiced alveolar fricative with a sound very similar to the English "s". Consequently, in Basque, we find that the compound affix spelled zko is pronounced as "sco". Moreover, after certain consonants, after certain consonants, an empathetic e is added, and "sco" becomes "esco". When the instrumental ending is added to a stem, it results in a compound meaning made of, by means of. For example, egur, wood; egurres, made of wood; egurresco, now an adjective, that which is made of wood; euskara, Basque; euskaras, in Basque; euskaresco, an adjective, that which is said or written in Basque. As in the case of egurresco, the compound suffix "sco" can show up as "esco". We can turn to English, which has two versions of the Proto-Indo-European "sco", one that dates back to Germanic, and another that is a variant coming from French as a result of language contacts that occurred after the Norman conquest. First, in Germanic languages, as is well known, the Proto-Indo-European "sco" developed into "ish", regularly used to form adjectives. For example, nachesh, foolish; nakrish, einfälle, foolish ideas, like the ideas of a fool, from ner, fool; kindish, childish, from kind, child. That same suffix ends up in English as ish, as childish, having the quality of a child; foolish, having the quality of being a fool, as well as in adjectives of origin, Flemish, English, etc. The second example of "sco", which is found in English, appears in words of French extraction, as in picturesque, derived from pittoresque in French, a term that has its counterpart in Spanish as pintoresco. In Romance languages, the same suffixing element often becomes esco, isco, yesco, and even usco. As Brugmann demonstrates with abundant examples, the Proto-Indo-European suffix "sko" is widespread in Indo-European languages, not only in Germanic, but also in Balto-Slavic, where it shows up as isko or ishka in Lithuanian, denoting, again, origin and connections, fitness, and quality. In Slavic languages, this suffixing element produces adjectives and has a very high frequency of usage. A few more examples. The high frequency of the Proto-Slavic adjectival suffix isk is particularly noteworthy. Indeed, classed as a Proto-Slavic element, it is linked directly to the Proto-Indo-European suffix "sko." This affix is regularly found in adjectival formations. For example, in Slovenian and Bulgarian, adjectives such as polski, Polish, also with the meaning of agricultural from pole, or for poldielski, agricultural, or rudniski, of the mining, from ruden ore. In Slavic languages, the suffix "sk" is regularly used to indicate affiliation or place of origin. And as would be expected, adjectives such as Ruski, Russian, are common. If considered continuations of the primary feature lineage under this study, in this particular study, they contain the instrumental of material means, and together with the suffix "ko," this combination gives the Proto-Slavic suffix "sk" its particular adjectival value. To summarize, when compared to the Proto-Indo-European "sko," which currently is viewed as nothing more than a monomorphemic variant of the Proto-Indo-European derivational suffix "ko," we can appreciate that the Basque morpheme "sko" is by far the more structurally complex entity. It is a compound morpheme composed of two discrete elements that results in a meaning combination made up of an instrumental case ending and an adnominal locative or genitive locative marker, that is "ko." When the Basque data set is compared to the Proto-Indo-European "sko," the Basque instrumental markers would explain the sibilant elements in the Proto-Indo-European variant "sko." As it is currently understood, the Proto-Indo-European "sko" is a simple additive structure composed of two elements, "s" and "ko," right, to form "sko." But no semantic meaning is attributed to the sibilant. Its meaning is totally opaque in Indo-European languages. Hence, the Proto-Indo-European "sko" is viewed only as an allomorph, a variant of the affix "ko." When we put Basque into the equation, we find out that in Basque, each of the two elements, that is "s" and "ko," has its own set of functions, and I've listed only a very few of them here. These can be combined to form the compound unit "sko," composed of two morphemes. In contrast, in the case of the Proto-Indo-European suffix, as I said, its morphemic structure is opaque, and in the sense that the reason for the addition of the sibilant is left unexplained. In Euskera, all three affixes are alive and active, "ko," "s," and "sko." Each of them acts as a structural element, component of the language. Therefore, in Basque, we can say that the elements have discrete and clearly identifiable meanings and functions. In contrast, of these three components, only the first "ko" and the third "sko" appear to have survived fully intact in Indo-European languages. In short, the evidence points to the fact that these two data sets in Indo-European languages belong to the same primary feature lineage, and hence suggests that they can be traced back to a common ancestral primary feature lineage. The lineage chosen is one already defined by Indo-European historical linguistics as preserving an ancient phylogenetic signal within Indo-European languages. Comparing the lineage as it appears in Indo-European languages to the lineage from Basque increases the time depth, as I stated at the beginning, that can be assigned tentatively to both data sets. In sum, the comparison allows us to discern phylogenetic signals that take us back to much earlier stages than are currently accessible to us using the Indo-European research paradigm. The results, although still preliminary, give rise to the following working hypothesis. The primary feature lineage in question could date back to a family of Western hunter-gatherer languages whose most direct descendant is Basque. This would mean that feature lineages classed as primary feature lineages passed into what were to become Indo-European languages, which could also explain why Basque and Indo-European languages share this primary feature lineage, and why this feature lineage is found in all branches of Indo-European. Now for the transmission of the feature lineage. The new narrative requires imagining a stage in which contacts between speakers occurred, permitting the primary feature lineage to be passed on. One version of this hypothetical contact stage would be a scenario in which speakers of these Western hunter-gatherer languages had extensive and prolonged contacts with speakers of languages that were already typologically Indo-European in their structure. Loan words carrying the affixes in question would have been copied into the lexicon of the speakers of these incipient Indo-European languages, and eventually the affix would have become separated from the stem and turned into a productive derivational affix attached to native stems, which is what we see today in Indo-European languages. But there's a second scenario, equally hypothetical, that could explain the similarities between the two sets of data. But it's one that requires perhaps it's more radical in terms of what it requires us to do with respect to rethinking the traditional Indo-European paradigm. This scenario would have a family of Western hunter-gatherer languages being spoken across broad swaths of Europe, a language family of which, again, Basque would be the most direct descendant. Over time, some of these languages slowly developed a different typological profile, one that distanced them from the typology of the Western hunter-gatherer base, and gave rise to typological features associated with historically attested Indo-European languages, leaving Basque as an apparent isolate. In sum, analyzing with care the two data sets has allowed us to do an informed comparative study, contrasting the meaning and functions of the morphemes in each data set in order to construct a sequentially stratified model and show the ways that this primary feature lineage may have developed. To conclude, even though only a single feature lineage, primary feature lineage, has been the focus of this talk, the results raise some serious questions, such as the reasons that this primary feature lineage shows up both in Basque and Indo-European languages. Many questions remain unanswered, including the how, when, and where of the transmission processes that were involved. In this brief presentation, only one primary feature lineage has been described, and that fact could lead to the conclusion that it is an anomaly, which doesn't merit further attention, that it came about by pure chance, that two totally independent evolutionary processes led to the same results. That conclusion, however, would be misguided, given that this primary feature lineage is only one of many that could be cited and which will be discussed in depth in the book-length version of the current investigation. When all of these primary feature lineages are documented and thoroughly described, their implications are considerable. Moreover, the approach is one that could offer a platform for interdisciplinary dialogue, conversations that could allow for the reassessment of work that has already been done in archaeology and genetics, as well as in the field of Indo-European comparative historical linguistics. So, if you wish more information on this, you can go to the link that is there on the screen, and there you'll find a very preliminary version of a book-length manuscript. Okay, thank you.